Welcome to episode 507. On this week's show, we talk about Frank Peretti's novels from the 1980s about spiritual warfare and how they're still shaping the way many evangelicals think about cultural involvement and politics. Then Beth Allison Barr is back 1 year after the release of her provocative book, The Making of Biblical Womanhood. She discusses what she's learned from her critics as well as from her fans and offers some pastoral advice for those still struggling in patriarchal Christian communities. All of that, plus a family finds a tasty time capsule in their bathroom wall, and the underappreciated charms of Dubuque, Iowa. Here is episode 507.
Hey there, welcome back to the Holy Post Podcast. I'm Phil Vischer. I am here with Christian Taylor. Hi, Christian.
Hey, Phil.
And Sky Jatani.
Hi.
Hi, Sky. Do we need nicknames?
I have a nickname.
Like, no, but
Sky
it's
is
the
his
one you've
nickname.
used your whole life, so it doesn't count anymore.
No, if you
Like-
look down at my recording little thing,
All right, what did you type in today?
Cheery
Holy
McCheesy.
Cheery McCheesy. It's Sky Cheery McCheesy Jatani.
Yeah,
Where did that come from, Sky?
I don't know. Because he's been on my case that I've been kind of negative or poopy or... So every time I log in now to record one of these, I give myself a little pep talk and I give myself a peppy little nickname. Like last week it was Peppy and Le Pew. And this time it's Cheery McCheesy.
That's
I love how you're
Mhm.
actively taking action to
Wow.
improve your
See?
life.
If you believe it, if you can dream it, you can do it. No, if you believe it, you can make it. You're manifesting the universe. I don't know. It's the secret, the gift, the
Power of positive thinking.
power of positive.
What's that? Vincent Peale?
Yeah,
Norman
Norman
Vincent Peale.
Norman.
Vincent
Norman.
Peale.
Yeah.
Boy, that's the 80s.
Yeah, you're going way back.
Come back.
You're
Mhm.
going way back to the Trump family pastor. And now it's time for the theme song. What's the news that you like the most? Who's your favorite podcast host? If it's breakfast, get your toast. It's Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. Sky and Phil and the Holy Post. And sometimes Christian. Okay, anyone do anything wildly interesting in the last week or so? Christian, did you travel? Did you go anywhere?
I went to the Dubuque Film Festival in Dubuque, Iowa.
Julian.
Julian Dubuque, yes.
Yeah.
It was, I cannot speak highly enough about that little town. Have you been there?
I love Dubuque. I think
I do
Dubuque is
too.
Have you stayed at the Hotel Julian?
That's where I stay every time.
Oh, isn't that cute? Oh,
It's adorable. And have you gone
Yeah.
up the elevator?
in the hotel?
No. There's an elevator.
There's a ventricular. What's the name of those railroads that goes brrr up a really steep hill? A ventriculator?
Ventricular?
I don't know.
I don't know.
No.
Anyway, do you know what it's for?
To take you up the hill.
Well, do you know why it started?
No.
So there was this businessman, I think he was a banker, and he lived on this big hill looking over all of Dubuque.
Yeah.
But it would take him in the carriage days like half an hour to get up for lunch, half an hour to get down, and it was just taking too much of his time. So he built this elevator so he could just go up to his house, have lunch, and come back down. And it's
Wow.
been there ever since.
That's fantastic. If you don't know, Dubuque, Iowa, sponsoring this week's
The Bureau of Tourism from
Bureau
Dubuque.
of Tourism, the oldest city in Iowa, a French settlement by Julien Dubuque, very Catholic, has 2 or 3 colleges, including big Catholic university, and some really fun old architecture because it's such an old town, and a fantastic I bumped into it walking around Dubuque, Carnegie Library from one of the original
Ooh.
Carnegie libraries up on a hill. So,
It was
yeah.
also right at the Mississippi River, so you can look over the beautiful, mighty Mississippi.
Yep.
And it has the best film festival I've been to called the Julian Dubuque International Film Festival every April. Can't miss it.
Because the French settler Julien Dubuque was a huge film fan, as far as
I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's got to be
okay.
what it is.
Sky, you got anything to top that?
I have nothing to top that.
Are there
Sorry.
any small town hamlets that you'd like to promote?
I can't think of any.
Miami of Ohio. What town is that in?
Oxford, of course.
Of course.
Oxford.
That's a cute
So
town.
here's
It
why here's why I spent a couple days in Dubuque a few years ago. I'm always looking for how to make myself more efficient in when I need to write a lot quickly. And I thought I need to get not only just out of the house, but out of town. So where could I drive to relatively easily and then maybe rent, either just a little condo, something that's not too expensive. And I was doing a search, probably VRBO, Verbo, vacation rental by owner. And turns out there's a whole section of Dubuque they used to have a lot of window companies that manufactured windows, and they're these
Like
big old.
Pella?
Yeah, but that's in Pella, Iowa.
Yeah, I thought that was in
Not in
Pella.
Dubuque. These were
Right.
other ones that no longer exist because I think Pella took them all out. And so there are these big old brick warehouses that they're now converting into lofts. So there's a loft district in downtown Dubuque, and I was able to rent this cool old, it was a 2-bedroom, was the littlest one I could find, loft overlooking downtown Dubuque. And I wrote there. It was actually one of the most effective writing retreats I've ever done. And then I would write for a while, and then I'd go walk around and look at like the old historic courthouse and the old historic theater building. Then I found the old Carnegie Library, then walk up the hill in the bluffs, and then look over the little city from the hill. And it was a lot of fun. That's my story from Dubuque.
Quick question. Inquiring minds want to know.
Yeah.
What were you writing?
I was writing one of the Bible study series for Right Now Media. I don't remember which book of the Bible, but one of the Faith Blocks series. And I ended up in 2 days, I wrote in 1 day, I wrote like 7 of the segments.
Wow.
And they're like,
That's a productive day.
10 minutes each. I was flying. I was inspired by Dubuque.
Well, it has that gold dome on top of is that the courthouse? That beautiful gold dome? That would inspire anybody.
This is like a travel log for Dubuque now. What happened here?
Sky, is there next week, you need to pick a small town and then come and make a presentation. And then hopefully then the last week's town will sponsor next week's podcast.
What if it's not a positive review?
No, that does not help. No, we don't want a negative. We're not telling people where not to go. We're telling people you should check it out. And if you go to Dubuque, you're only like 10 minutes away from Galena, Illinois.
I was going to say that too.
One of the most interesting teeny towns in America.
Yes.
So you need to go to Galena. And
they're adorable.
Where Abraham Lincoln gave one of his speeches when he was running for president at the Galena Hotel, which is still there. You can stay in the same hotel where Abe Lincoln gave a speech from a balcony. Can't beat that with a stick.
Nope.
Can ya?
And they have adorable hotels too and little shops.
They do.
And
like the zillion on bed and breakfasts.
Mighty Mississippi. Yep.
Okay.
Can't beat it.
All right. Well, that's all for this week's Let's Travel Around the Midwest. We'll see you next week, folks. So do you remember the story a few months ago of the guy who was digging in his backyard and found 110 bowling balls?
Yes.
No.
The bowling ball.
Tell
Maybe
me
you
the
weren't there,
story.
Christian. No, I'm not gonna,
was Christian not on that episode?
I don't know.
No.
Maybe you weren't on that episode. Anyway, they discovered that they figured it out that the town is near the headquarters of Brunswick. And back in the 60s and 50s, they would, when they had bad bowling balls, they just throw them out and they would let people take them and use them for whatever they wanted, which included fill. So if you had a depression in your yard, you could fill it with old bowling balls. And that's what someone had done, more than 100 bowling balls under the backyard of this guy's house. Anyway, so in the spirit of things that people have found in or under their homes that they did not expect to find, we have a continuing episode. An Illinois family, that one was in Michigan, this one is in Illinois. A northern Illinois family was renovating their home this month, fixing up their kitchen and bathroom in Crystal Lake, Illinois. They were replacing a built-in toilet paper holder, those old ones that are tile and built right into the wall. They had to open a 4-inch by 6-inch section of the wall, and they saw something inside. They spotted a towel inside the wall wrapping up something that the young parents were very concerned about at first, and they actually had their kids go into another room so they could pull it out and see what someone had wrapped in a towel and then built into the wall of their house.
Can we guess? Can this be a
Would you
guessing?
like to make any guesses?
Yes.
What they
Yes.
found wrapped in a towel in the wall of their house?
Okay, so here's my thinking. This is in Crystal Lake. Is it Crystal Lake,
Yes.
Illinois?
Mhm.
Yes, Crystal Lake, Illinois, which is outside of Chicago. And we all know that the mafia lived like all around in the suburbs. So I'm thinking it's a gun in the wall and they
Okay.
tiled over it so that they wouldn't be discovered.
Okay.
How old is the house?
Built in 1959.
Oh.
Maybe I'm a little late.
A gun is a good guess. That is a good guess. But I'm trying to think of why would Phil have it on the show? Why would he bring this story up? Which
Is
makes
it
me think,
news of the butt? Do you think this is news of the butt in disguise?
I hope not. Because if there's some butt-related item in this wall, that's really, really weird.
That's
Do
concerning.
you think it's animal related? Like this is animal news
It could be.
in disguise?
Or is it some kind of like religious artifact or some 1950s Christian merchandise or I don't know.
I'm going to have to require you to make a guess.
He's
Or a
going to
dead body?
require me to make
That's
a
what
guess.
his parents thought it was, right? Didn't the parents think it was a dead body or
I
something?
think it's a diary confessing to someone's love affair with JFK.
Oh, I like that guess.
I don't know. That's my guess.
Wildly specific.
Mhm.
Okay. Was it, judges, was it a diary of someone confessing to their love affair with JFK? Judges, was it a firearm? Instead, what they found was a bag with 2 hamburger wrappers and a remarkably well-preserved order of French fries from McDonald's.
What?
One of the first McDonald's opened about a mile away in 1959, the same year they built this house. And they took an order of food. They didn't put the hamburgers in there, but they put hamburger wrappers and a full order of French fries from McDonald's from 1959, wrapped them in a towel, and built them into the wall of their new house.
That's
Okay, wait a
bizarre.
minute. Were the French fries still there?
Yes.
How did a mouse not destroy them?
It was a towel.
But the fact that here's what's kind of gross is what's in that wall is what's also probably preserved in the large intestine of the people who put it there.
Yes, we all have a towel wrapped around French fries inside us, either literally or metaphorically.
Do you remember
Go
the
ahead.
Super Size Me documentary?
Yes.
With Gordon Matlock or whatever his name was?
Yes.
What was it? Anyway, he took McDonald's French fries and some French fries from just a normal non-fast food restaurant and put them both in jars. You remember this?
Yes.
No.
And then time-lapsed photographed them decaying over time, and the normal French fries got moldy and decayed, and like food does, and the McDonald's French fries were like perfect for
there's a picture of
weeks.
these. The French fries were remarkably well preserved
Because they're full of preservatives. They're like 90% plastic.
Here's come on. Now, we were going to get McDonald's as a sponsor for next week's show.
Oh, sorry.
You just ruined it, Sky. So here's my question for you guys. What restaurant have you ever in your life been so excited about that you might understand how you could buy some of its food and put it in the wall in your new house to save forever?
But come on, this had to be an accident. Don't you think it was an accident? Like somebody had a lunch and they
in a towel?
I don't know. Maybe some kid stuffed it in there when they weren't looking. It's just weird. Why would you do that?
They were excited about the new restaurant that opened.
No.
It was a time capsule.
It's a time capsule.
It was a time capsule.
Nobody
and
would
put it in a towel.
Nobody with half a brain would put some food item, even wrapped in a towel, in their wall because you're asking for rodents and
I would put a Portillo's Italian beef sandwich in the wall of my house as tribute. I pay tribute to Portillo's. Christian,
yes.
You're on this bandwagon. Tell us what you would put in it.
Excellent. I would actually put anything from the meal I had at the restaurant called Per Se in New York City. It was like this $3,000 dinner or some crazy amount that someone gave us for my birthday. And it was the most unbelievable, memorable birthday meal I have ever had. So I would put that whole meal in that wall.
But then you wouldn't have eaten it.
True. That's good. But
Well,
maybe I should save a tiny little bit of
can't-
each plate.
You can't time capsule your cake and eat it too.
Well, that brings up a good point, Phil. These
Yes,
people
Guy.
obviously didn't enjoy the McDonald's French fries so much that they consumed them.
They were $10. They were 10 cents for a bag of fries. They contributed 10 cents to their time capsule in their bathroom wall behind the toilet paper dispenser.
I'll tell you what, if I were Franklin Graham, I would definitely put some Panda Express in my wall.
I saw that too.
Did you see that?
I didn't. Please enlighten me.
I don't know how.
Franklin Graham tweeted, my parents lived in China. I was born in China, and I just got to say, Panda Express is probably the best Chinese food in America.
And he's got a picture of himself holding a cup from Panda Express.
Yeah, that he discovered Panda, apparently for the first time discovered Panda Express, and that it's absolutely the best. And I think it goes without saying whether he was thinking most authentic Chinese food in America. Okay, Sky, what restaurant would you put in the wall of your house?
I don't know. I think if I was actually building a wall, a bunch of Chipotle burritos would probably hold it up.
I wonder if anyone for 63 years, so those French fries were sitting there next to the toilet behind the wall for 63 years. I wonder if anyone sitting there going to the bathroom said, I smell French fries, but I didn't eat French fries. What's going on here? Okay. That's
bizarre.
Phil. Somehow you did turn this into news of the butt.
This has been news of the bag of French fries in the wall. We need
it's like a bad Edgar Allan Poe story. Like his first draft.
It is.
And he's like, oh, that's terrible. I need to put a body in there.
The people in the house were getting older, but the fries were getting younger. Or was it the other way around? I don't know. Marjorie Taylor Greene. Do you know who she is?
Sadly.
Yeah. I heard her yelling. My husband was watching something the other night, in the living room, and I just heard her yelling and yelling. I'm like, what are you listening to? And he just turned his computer toward me, and I saw her yelling at Jim Acosta.
Oh,
I don't think I've ever...
Seems angry.
I don't think I've ever said anything or tweeted anything or written anything about her or anything she's ever done.
Yeah.
Because I can't bring myself to admit that I exist in a universe where she is a real person.
Okay. So there are, now Sky, you're not saying that there's only nut jobs on one side of the political spectrum.
No,
right?
I'm not saying anything about the other side of the political spectrum.
But this is the reason that I'm bringing up this particular somewhat nutty person is not that there aren't liberal nut jobs, but some of the conservative nut jobs are the ones that are evoking Jesus in their nuttery. And that's where I say, might have to speak about this. A conservative Catholic activist is calling for Georgia Republican Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene to be sanctioned by the House of Representatives leadership over a recent interview in which she referred to bishops from the Catholic Church, something they were doing. One of their behaviors was an example of Satan controlling the Catholic Church. Okay, this is another fun quiz. Satan is controlling the Catholic Church. Marjorie Taylor Greene has found evidence of this. What is the evidence that she has found?
If it wasn't Marjorie Taylor Greene, if it was someone else accusing the Catholic Church of having satanic influence, I would say it's probably related to the child sex abuse scandals and cover-ups that go back.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, you might say that. Or even if someone is, a hyper-fundamentalist, encouraging prayer to Mary or prayer to the saints, say that, well, that's evil. That's evidence that Satan is controlling the Catholic Church. No, here, you want to know what Marjorie Taylor Greene's evidence of Satan controlling the Catholic Church was?
I'm not sure I do, honestly.
You didn't read this article? You didn't see the article?
No.
Okay, so you honestly don't know.
No, I read it.
Oh, you're okay. Yeah. Bishop
playing along, Phil.
Okay, thank you, Christian. I appreciate that, and I'll tell you what you've won just for playing along.
Excellent.
At the end of the show. Bishops were helping undocumented immigrants at the border. We're helping, providing aid.
And so Satan
to immigrants
is controlling the priests who are trying to help the immigrants.
Yeah, because if there's one thing Jesus said, do not help the immigrants. That is Satan, Peter. Satan, get behind me if you're giving water to immigrants who aren't coming through a legally represented port of entry.
To be very clear here,
Yeah.
these Catholic priests and Catholic parishioners are not helping
They're not
people
smuggling
illegally.
people in.
Right. They're not crossing the border illegally with undocumented folks.
No.
They are assisting refugees and migrants who have already crossed the border and are in need of food, shelter, water, medicine, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's what she believes is satanic.
That's satanic.
Yeah.
That is satanic.
There's a verse that comes to mind.
I think.
What is that verse, Guy?
Isaiah 5:20.
Which says,
Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil,
Oh, that's a good verse.
who put darkness for light and light for darkness, who put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter.
Like the Catholic priests that are doing evil and calling it good by helping people that are in need, but that aren't technically going through the right legal channels.
now,
Right.
I did read this article, and so I read down a little further.
Mm-hmm.
And as you read down in that article, it just becomes a lot about how she mixes her Christianity with and her politics. And so, you are doing the Lord's work if you're upholding all of the laws of the Constitution the way that, Christians, of course.
Well, we should mix our Christianity with our politics because we should mix it with everything that we do, right? So that's good. But she then elevates the Constitution above the Bible.
Right.
Right.
In saying, but the Constitution comes first. And the Constitution says, apparently, you don't help people that are trying to enter the country illegally by giving them water.
You realize that same logic 170 years ago, whatever it is, would have been used to perpetuate slavery.
And
because as written, the Constitution endorsed slavery.
Yeah.
So for those Christians who were working to end slavery or even to help slaves escape slavery, she could have said the same thing, that they're doing Satan's work. It's unchristian. And the quote is great. She says, yes, we are supposed to love one another, but meaning the Catholic Church's definition of what love one another means destroying our laws. It means completely perverting what our Constitution says. That's your point, Phil. Like, she is putting the Constitution over the commands of Jesus.
Love others, yeah.
And what's okay, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because obviously there are a lot of people that do a lot of nutty things. And if we just spend all of our time singling them out and saying, nutty, that's nutty, it's not very productive as a podcast. But that ties into what I wanted to talk about next because of kind of the easy way she threw Satan into that disagreement she has with Catholic legal aid or Catholic relief services, that if you're not doing what I think is the right thing to do in this scenario, I'm going to invoke Satan and throw that in here. And there was a piece in Vox this week, a long piece entitled Revisiting the Christian Fantasy Novels That Shaped Decades of Conservative Hysteria. And initially you think, oh, Left Behind. We're going to talk about Left Behind. But no, Left Behind wasn't the beginning. We have to go back before Left Behind. And then once they said this, I was like, yeah, obviously, Frank Peretti's books. Okay, if you weren't there, if you weren't reading Christian fiction in 1986, Sky, were you born?
I was 10 years old.
Yeah, okay.
I think I was out of college.
I was way born.
Caitlin, were you born? No, she wasn't born. This Present Darkness. Frank Peretti's This Present Darkness came out in 1986, and its sequel, Piercing the Darkness, came out in 1989. It was the Darkness duology. Here's how the article reads, because Vox is obviously a secular news outlet, but they say that at least 3 of the members of their culture group grew up evangelical, all read Frank Peretti's books when they were pre-teens. And
that's probably about when I read it in probably middle school when I was 12, 13 years old.
That's pretty heavy to read when you're that age.
And I only read the first book.
It's exciting stuff, though. It's exciting.
Yeah, I loved it.
A sinister schoolteacher steadily grooms kids in their care to accept liberal indoctrination, ultimately leading to the takeover of young minds by shadowy forces. All the while, the teachers are backed by a larger, high-powered conspiracy to control the government, the educational system, and the national media, all in the name of evil leftists battling the ongoing culture war. Dump, dump, dump. This rhetoric might sound like sheer fantasy, but it's increasingly becoming the dominant worldview of many right-wing U.S. conservatives. It's also the literal plot of two novels by Christian fantasy author Frank Peretti, This Present Darkness and Piercing the Darkness. And then they say these are very likely two of the most culturally influential novels in recent history. And as I started to think about that, I thought that might be true. You know, everyone goes to the Left Behind books and their focus on eschatology and how it shaped a whole generation of Christians, you know, to be looking at world events in a certain way. But the This Present Darkness and the sequel, the Darkness books, they weren't about the end times. They weren't about the rapture. They weren't about how are we getting out of here. They were about spiritual warfare, and that spiritual warfare is always going on all around us, even though you can't see it. And that it was influencing people, and it was influencing systems, especially liberal and New Age systems.
Yeah, to simplify it, these books present spiritual warfare and cultural warfare as synonymous. That behind our culture war issues are actual spiritual warfare, demons and
Actual
angels.
demons and angels
Right.
duking it out with flaming swords.
Right. Now, to be fair to Frank Peretti, these are novels. These are essentially fantasy novels that, unfortunately, a lot of evangelicals in this era read and took almost as manuals.
Yes, as
But
a scripture.
And we've seen that before, like the Shack, forget the author's name, but like different people have read novels, Christian novels, and taken them as either systematic theology or some kind of accurate depiction of reality. And that's what happened with Frank Peretti's books as well.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, but to his credit, he did say they shouldn't be read
Right.
as a manual.
Right.
Yeah. He went out of his way to say this is not an account of actual spiritual warfare or the mechanics of spiritual warfare. These are novels for your entertainment. The Vox writers say Peretti most likely meant much of this fantasy to be read metaphorically, not literally, but his audience missed that memo.
Right.
And I think that kind of goes without saying. It's kind of like how we look at like how much of our view of angels or even hell is based on medieval art and not actual scripture, but we just took the medieval art that kind of imprinted in our brains when we saw it somewhere as pictures, like photographic evidence of what angels look like. And this is the same case where this was a 1980s work of fiction, but we took it as an accurate picture. And maybe that's because movies have just conditioned us to kind of believe what we see. You know, oh, wow, I guess that's how the Dan Brown novels and the movies made, that's what the Catholic Church is like. And this is what spiritual warfare is like. But I read these when I was, I don't know, I would have been 20-ish, 21, because they sold millions of copies. They were the best-selling Christian fiction until the Left Behind books. So Left Behind books took all the spotlight off of them, but these were just as influential before then. And it painted a picture of the world is out to get evangelical Christians. Evangelical Christians are the true Christians. The world is out to get them, which includes liberal Christians are also out to get them. And people that are opposed to evangelical Christians are under the influence of demons. That's why they oppose them. So if you have millions of people that have soaked in that storyline, then, and this is right in the Reagan years. This is in the midst of, abortion, and euthanasia is coming, and the culture of death. And you see Everett Koop and Francis Schaeffer books. So this was in a moment. It was also, they point out that it came out in the middle of the satanic panic. which
Yes.
was when everyone was terrified at these reports of people that had been pulled into Satanism, and that kids had been pulled into Satanism and, eaten, and there's like all this. So we had Satanists are devouring children. And then we had liberals are devouring American culture. And then we had these books that came along and said, and it's all connected. It's all connected
Yeah.
with these demons swirling around our heads. And I'm just thinking, wow, no wonder we are where we are today.
And critical to these books and some of the rhetoric in that era was the gateway into this demonic realm of darkness were things like rock and roll music
And
and
yoga.
and anything remotely Eastern, from Buddhism to Hinduism to anything that wasn't white Northern European religion, was like the gateway drug into all this. And psychology, any kind of therapy, any kind of psychology or psychological help was like, you are just inviting demons to take over. It was ridiculous, and it was paranoia. And I'm curious, because you guys are 10 years older than I am. So I probably encountered that book maybe when I was a freshman in high school. And that was also around the time when I was first beginning to ask serious questions about faith and exploring those questions and reading the Bible again. And I read This Present Darkness and essentially laughed my way through the book. I thought it was so
What?
utterly ridiculous. And as a novel, there was entertainment value to it, but I never ever thought this
But
was anything remotely.
Didn't you believe in spiritual warfare? What were they teaching you on the puppet team?
I was not on the puppet team when I was a freshman.
That was high
So
school.
anyway,
Okay.
but how did you guys encounter that book and I'll explain why I think I laughed my way through it. But what was your experience?
Christian, shoot.
So it was very interesting, Phil, when I read this article. I appreciate you sending it. It was like a time warp for me because I hadn't thought about this book or this era at all until I read it. And it kind of showed me how far I'd come since I first read that. So I was probably in my 20s as well. I was in Washington, D.C. I was working on Capitol Hill. I was part of the moral majority. We
You
were
were
in
fighting the evil cabal of liberals.
Yes, and we were in the Fellowship Foundation, very male dominated, and so that's kind of where my mindset was when I read this book. And so I didn't catch any of the stuff that this article pointed out about the white male hierarchy, about the, racism inherent in the book, about just setting up all these different tropes. So I didn't catch any of that. But when this article was mentioning it, I was like, oh my goodness, it was there. But what that did for me at the time was it was very helpful for me to understand spiritual warfare, in the sense that I believe spiritual warfare is real. It talks about it in Ephesians, right? So, but it's hard to visualize. Well, what does that actually mean? What does that really look like? And so one of the things that stuck in my mind is there was this passage where he talks about, this guy sleeping or this girl sleeping, I don't remember who it was, and this demon had lifted up the person's head and taken his finger and was swirling, inside his dreams. It was this very vivid idea of what Satan does in our dreams, right? And I've always had very vivid dreams, a lot of nightmares. And so for me, I was like, oh, that's interesting, that Satan's kind of playing with my mind.
You were getting a demon swirly.
Yeah. So what it did was it made me visualize spiritual warfare in a way that I never had before. And it made me feel like, okay, there are forces outside of my control that I cannot see. And so it woke me up to that reality. But that's all I walked away with. It wasn't like any of those other things majorly influenced me. And as I grew spiritually, those became the dominating ways of thinking. I'm not stuck in the 1980s in the Frank Peretti book. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but there's still the ideas of we're under attack. The liberals are organizing against us. We're the most persecuted group. So those things were kind of also brought to light in there, because you can swap out the villain in the Peretti books for George Soros today. and people are doing the exact same thing of these there's a puppet master who is working for Satan, who's pulling all of these strings. So I think we can be influenced by it. I'm just wondering how many in our audience, how many of you in our audience read Frank Peretti books at some point growing up in the church? And I'd love to start a chat room about how did it influence you?
Do you want to know what I wonder? I've gotten to the place in my Christian faith where I don't see all these bad things that happened or bad groups that as satanic. Like, I feel like now there can be plenty of bad thing, quote unquote, bad things that happen to me or in my life or to other people I know that can honestly be gifts of the Lord. Like, I've interpreted them as bad and maybe they are painful, but it doesn't mean they come from Satan necessarily. So I think that's where I kind of changed in my thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, you're a more nuanced thinker. Even Paul does this in 2 Corinthians, where he talks about being given a thorn in the flesh that came from Satan, and he pleads to the Lord multiple times to remove this thorn, and the Lord finally says to him, "No, my grace is sufficient for you." Where this thorn in the flesh given to him by an agent of Satan is nonetheless used by God for his sanctification. That's a very nuanced understanding of complicated realities, whereas a Frank Peretti book or those who are deeply influenced by this novel want to see everything as always black or white, good or evil, from
You're
God
on
or
their
from
side
exactly. And
or our
everything
side.
everything and everyone has to fall in one of those two categories, and that's just not how the New Testament works. It's
Yeah.
way more
Right.
complicated than that.
Well,
So
Phil, what about you? What did you think when you read it? How did it shape you?
I remember thinking, wow, is this how it is? Because that's really exciting. It was exciting. Like, this is really, like, there's really life and death struggles behind the curtain over everything that's happening in my little town. The pastor of my town, my church, does he have demons and angels fighting over his head as he's preaching? So here's some comments, because Vox hosted a roundtable discussion with the 3 staff writers that grew up reading these books in the evangelical world. One of them says, the books tapped into everything that I already thought was basically true because it was what people were already talking about on Christian radio. I thought for sure if I listened to rock music, I would discover one day that my mind had been colonized by a demon. I think what was so appealing, and this is really interesting because it has to do with all conspiracy theorizing. I think what was so appealing is that the same thing that's appealing about any conspiracy thinking is the same thing that's appealing about any conspiracy thinking. It ascribes meaning and purpose and logic to things that aren't honestly all that meaningful or purposeful or logical, like random accidents or senseless struggles that ordinary people encounter every day. It made me feel meaningful, like a warrior who could join with other warriors to protect what was good. Okay, so there's value to that, right? But then she says, when I started reading about QAnon's rise as a belief system, I instantly saw the same sort of thinking at play, that its believers could save the world from a shadowy and hidden cabal of evil. So what's good, Sky? Sky, you're a pastor. At least you were a pastor. Sky, you're a pastor. What's good about recognizing that we can be a part of fighting for what's good? And then what's dangerous about seeing this battle between light and dark everywhere we look?
Yeah, first of all, that language is common in the Gospels and in the epistles of the New Testament. There is evil in the world, there is goodness in the world. There's a kingdom of darkness, a kingdom of light, as Paul talks about. So that's an appropriate framework to think about. Where we get into trouble is when we believe that each person resides only in one or the other.
Right.
And rather than recognizing that I myself at any time can be a participant in one or the other, I have the propensity within myself toward selfishness and greed and lust and anger and jealousy and all these forces that will bring about bad things into the world that are not aligned with God's kingdom. And so the primary battle is not external. It's not against flesh and blood, as Paul would say. It's internal. It's my own transformation and sanctification into the kind of person who does the things that are consistent with God's kingdom. And what this kind of novel and fictionalization does, and what a lot of the conspiracy theory does, is says, I now am a good guy. I have the white hat on, and they are the bad guys with the black hats on, and I have to fight them.
Right.
And that is
Right.
the antithesis of what the New Testament is calling us to, which is the recognition, as I forget who it was who said it, that the line between good and evil does not run between us and them, but through each human heart.
Yeah.
You know, what I'm curious about, Sky, is that the New Testament uses a lot of the language in a sense that is used in the Frank Peretti books, in that, there's that Satan is a roaring lion waiting to, devour. And, there are forces, good and evil, that we cannot see that are constantly at work. So, and yes, I agree with you. A lot of that should be looking at ourselves inwardly because we have that in all of us. But is there anything that we can take away from this, you know, visualizing what spiritual warfare looks like? Is there any truth in sort of this way that Frank Peretti painted the battle in the heavenlies?
I think the better question, not that it's a bad question, but rather than saying, is there any truth in this? I'd rather ask, is there anything helpful in this?
Okay.
And
Answer that then.
Isn't the
and
truth helpful, Sky?
yes, the truth is helpful, but the truth that is most helpful is the truth we find in the New Testament. And what's interesting to me, and part of the reason I laughed about this book when I was 14 or whatever it was when I read it, is it wasn't I wasn't laughing at Frank Peretti or the book itself, but the way so many Christians around me were reacting to the book was so laughable because they took it like it was Holy Scripture. Like this is an accurate depiction
Mhm.
of the world and how Christians
Right.
are to
It's
live
a
it.
transmission from the front. This is
Right.
what's actually
Yeah.
going on at the front that we didn't know about.
And it was like, okay, if the existence of spiritual warfare and the literal warfare between angels and demons was supposed to be this explicit and this central to the way we operate as Christians in the world, why don't the New Testament authors talk about it that much? They don't. And when they do talk about it, it's in very veiled language. It's not explicit. And so to take a little tiny worldview element of the New Testament and magnify it into this is the central drama of the entire Christian life and mission is so losing the forest for the trees.
Right.
And so I think it's not helpful when you put so much emphasis on this stuff when the New Testament authors don't. It's not helpful. And what do
Okay.
the New Testament authors put all the emphasis on? Making sure that you and the community of Christians you are a part of are remaining loyal to Christ and cultivating the fruit of the Spirit in your life and in your community. That is our spiritual activity. That is how we cultivate the kingdom of light. It's not by fighting George Soros with, some kind of spiritual weaponry.
Okay. But, we're talking about Christians, quote unquote, as a whole, or evangelical Christians as a whole, looking at the liberals as the others and they're the enemies. But, I've heard lots of Christians that are Bible believing, Jesus loving Christians that still use language of this bad thing is happening. And so clearly we're being persecuted by the devil,
Mm-hmm.
or there's clearly spiritual warfare going on here. We need to pray so that the enemy will be defeated. As Christians, we use a lot of that language.
Mm-hmm.
And so are you saying that we need to reshape how we talk about this? I mean, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. I think I don't want to say that language is never appropriate, but I think it's often overused, where we make assumptions about the sources and reasons for events that we don't know. And like I mentioned earlier with Second Corinthians and Paul's language there of being given a thorn in the flesh, um, we don't always know the purposes of what's going on. We're not promised that we're going to be told everything that's going on or why it's happening. But to attribute everything to demonic oppression, spiritual attack, warfare, whatever it is, you know what? Sometimes bad things are happening to you because you're just stupid. And it's not demonic. It's just you made a dumb decision, or you made a selfish decision, or you made an unwise decision. And there's nothing demonic about it. You're just a fallible human being. Welcome to the club. And so I think part of the reason we gravitate toward this demonic and angelic language is it's a way of uh, avoiding culpability. It's avoiding responsibility. for ourselves and some of our own choices and decisions by making it an external enemy that's out to get me.
Hmm.
And sometimes it may well be true in certain cases. I don't know, but there's a lot I don't know. But I think we need to be doing a whole lot more of looking at the plank in our own eye rather than the demonic speck out in the world.
Okay, last thing I want to say about this, and I had completely forgotten about this, but this caught me up short. In both books, and this is someone in Vox, a woman writing for Vox commenting, in both books, male protagonists are accused of either child abuse or rape. And in both books, those accusations are lies concocted by demons to bring down powerful Christian men who are needed in the war against Satan.
Mm.
That is scary.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
How influential millions of Christians read that if someone, you're being accused of being a bad man, doing bad things to women or children, but God needs you. This is spiritual warfare.
Well, and
Satan's trying to bring you down with false accusations.
how many Christian leaders have we heard make exactly that defense when they're accused of something, that I'm being attacked by Satan, this is demonic?
So be careful how you're influenced by fiction that you're reading, because, wow, storytelling is powerful. And I hadn't thought about the Peretti books for a long time. And I know Frank Peretti didn't intend, any of that stuff to be used that way, but he found a fun storyline to run with, and we love a good story. So
I wonder what he would say today.
Yeah,
I really
am
would.
curious. I am curious. Go to holypost.com. Let us know what you think. Did you read the Peretti books when you were growing up? How did they affect you? Have you forgotten about them now that you're remembering them? Are you having strong emotions? Let us know. We're curious. And again, as always, thanks for supporting us on Patreon. We really appreciate you guys. You help us do what we're doing. And we got a great interview with Beth Allison Barr coming up. We're revisiting the Making of Biblical Womanhood on its first anniversary, I believe. Right, Sky?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is true. Okie dokie. And we will see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Good news for our Holy Post patrons, we have a bonus segment for you today. After Phil Christian and I had that conversation about Frank Peretti's books and spiritual warfare, we kind of kept talking even after the microphones were turned off and realized, wait a minute, this is some good content. So we turned the microphones back on and recorded a special 20-minute bonus segment where we continue to talk about those books, the way we encountered them when we were younger, and the ongoing impact that this way of thinking about the world is having on Christians today. So if you couldn't get enough of that earlier conversation and you want to engage more deeply, then definitely go to our Patreon support page and you can listen to that full bonus segment. And if you're not a Patreon supporter, well, now's a great time to sign up and get access to that and a whole bunch of other bonus material, live streams, merchandise, and other exclusive content only available to Holy Post Patreon supporters. You can sign up by going to holypost.com and clicking the Support Us link at the top of the page. It was about a year ago on episode 457 when Dr. Beth Allison Barr first came on the Holy Post to talk about her brand new book, The Making of Biblical Womanhood. Since then, the book has caused quite a stir, both with critics and fans. And now Dr. Barr is back a year later to talk about the impact the book has had, respond to common critiques of the book, and react to her fans' questions about where to go from here. She offers both practical and pastoral wisdom about how to move the needle away from patriarchy in many of our Christian communities. Here is Caitlin Shess's conversation with Dr. Beth Allison Barr.
Hi, Beth. Thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
I am so glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to start off just telling a little story, some background about you and me, and also pointing people to this lovely postscript that you wrote on the Making of Biblical Womanhood, the book that we're talking about today. That's over a year old now,
I know.
which is wild.
Yeah.
But you wrote this lovely postscript just kind of sharing some of your own story and responses to criticisms and reviews,
Mhm.
and also the hope that you have found and the ways that you've seen women set free from this. And you tell this story in the postscript about a group of women at a church. And it was a group of women led by my dear friend, Lacey Phillips, who's just the kindest, loveliest woman. And she had this group of women that were reading the book together. I was visiting my parents in Colorado Springs where
Ugh.
she lives, and she invited me to come to the book club. And I had barely knew her at all at the time and didn't know anyone else in this group. And I remember showing up, and somehow because of Twitter, we kind of roped you into zooming in
Yes.
to the book club. And I remember getting there and meeting a bunch of these new women, and Lacey telling me, I've been praying about it and I've been thinking about it. And I think we should just spend our time with Dr. Barr, just telling her what her book has meant to us. And I'll admit a little bit of, some of my upbringing that's a little suspicious of like hearing word from God. I was sort of like, I don't know, Lacey, have you planned very well what you want this night to be? And I was wrong and she was right and faithful. And so we just spent that night together, really having women, again, none of whom I had met. So a lot of their stories that were new to you were new to me as well. Just sharing their experiences in the church, their experiences of hurt. They're wrestling with what their role is and what they can do to use their gifts. And all of them just spending time. I mean, each took a turn around the room, going up to the front and kind of sitting face to face with you over Zoom and just sharing what your work had meant to them. And I partially bring this story up because I just think it's so lovely. And I love that you wrote about it in kind of thinking about the year since this book. But I also bring it up because I think something Lacey recognized and something that those women recognized and something that I've seen on Twitter, a lot of people recognize, is that this book has cost you, that it has been painful in lots of ways. And I'm sure there were some of those ways that you anticipated and some that I'm sure you did not. And so one thing I want to ask to start is one thing that multiple people on Twitter told me I should ask you, which is, how are you really? And the second follow-up question to that would just be, as people recognize in that question, the cost that this has had and the pain that it has caused you, has it been worth it? So how are you doing and how have you kind of thought through what this journey has been?
So I'll tell you, the night that you were in that book club with me, I was not doing well. That's an honest answer. And so it is really amazing to me to hear the other side, that Lacey felt from God that she needed to do this differently, because that clearly was, it was God encouraging me that this was something that I needed to keep doing. So, in fact, it's bringing tears to my eyes thinking about it. That was such a meaningful moment for me. And the reason I wrote about it in the postscript is because it encapsulates really these two questions you just asked me: is how am I doing, and is it worth it? So I will say that because of book groups like that, because of the responses that I have received from people behind the scenes, because of what I have seen the book do, I'm okay. I really am. It has,
Good.
I'm a very transparent person, and,
Yeah.
so, and it's just part of my personality. And so I just don't really hide things very well. My family jokes about that I just don't keep secrets. I'm not a good secret keeper. And so I think a part of me through this, I had to make a decision. Was I going to hide the way I really felt, or was I just going to let people know what it was like doing this journey? And I think the church has hidden enough. I think we have kept enough secrets that I just decided I didn't want to play that game, that I was just going to let people know what it was like doing this. And so as much as I did anticipate some of the responses, I think I didn't anticipate the nastiness of some of them, because I'm a very optimistic person. So I always think people will be better. And sometimes it surprises me when I find out that they aren't. And so I think there's been moments that have been really hard. But at the same time, every time one of those moments happened, and this is what I tried to get at in the postscript, something else happened that showed me what the book was doing. And it really is miraculous how God has shown me continuously through this process. I look back on it and I'm like, this has been such a growing period for me in my faith. I've always had strong faith. I don't know. It's not ever been anything I've questioned. I tell people I question the church, but it's never made me question God. And so that's one thing God has really taught me. So I think that also answers your other question. Was it worth it? Oh yeah, was totally worth it. I, I wish the cost hadn't been so high in some places. But at the same time, it has entered the conversation. The book has entered the conversation. And even if people don't completely agree with me, and even if there are a lot of people who have good, sort of are skeptical and like, I'm not sure about this, it still has made, I think, where people have to deal with it. And they have to, the answers for complementarianism represents people who believe the Bible is no longer a valid understanding of it. That people who believe differently about women in the church also believe the Bible. And so I think, and that's a place where I wanted to be. So it definitely is worth it. And as the further I move out from it, the more grateful I am that I had the opportunity to write it. So.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that the people who've read the book relate so much to the elements that you shared that were personal, that when asked, because I asked on Twitter, what should I ask Dr. Barr? And the amount of people who said, how is she doing? I think that's just a testament to how personal all of this is and to how people can understand, like they can relate to getting backlash for things in their churches. They can relate to receiving criticism that feels unfair. So I think that's just a testament to what the book has really done. I want to ask a question about history, because a lot of the pushback to the book, in my opinion, has been at least partially rooted in misunderstanding what history can and can't do for theological conversations, either thinking it can do more than it can do and expecting the book to do something that it couldn't possibly do, or criticizing the book because it thinks that history shouldn't be involved in the conversation at all, that we shouldn't be having theological conversations that involve history or sociology or philosophy. So can you talk a little bit about what you think the gift of historical study is for the church, for Christians, for people trying to work out theological questions?
I would love to talk about why history matters to theology. This is such a wonderful question. I do think there is a lot of misunderstanding about it, and I think part of that is because we have been trained that when we approach the Bible, especially from sort of this literal understanding that we take the Bible at its word, and that's what it means, and we believe the Bible. We are people of the book. Biblicist is one of the identifying markers for evangelicalism. So I think what we forget, though, is that the Bible is always read within a historical context. And no one comes to the Bible without caring who they are to it. And it is, and these are our historical biases. And even the way that the Bible has been received, this is what we call an academic scholarship reception history. And what it is looking at is how different people, because of their different contexts and cultures, they receive the Bible differently. And this really one of the things I was trying to get at in the Making of Biblical Womanhood is how the Bible, especially these passages about women, have been received differently over time, and how that matters for how women see themselves in the business of the church. And so I think, while history isn't theology, that's totally true. History informs theology, and it always has. So I don't think we can. I think it's impossible for us to really understand our theology without understanding the history that shaped our theology. So I would see them as really inseparable when you talk. And although I would also say that I'm so totally a historian, I am not a theologian. I've never really tried. I tried to make that clear in the book that I'm not a theologian, but part of that is because I prefer talking about the historical things that inform theology. That's what I love, and that's what's fun for me. So.
Yeah, and I think we need people doing both things. I think we need historians that are thinking about theological topics, and we need theologians who are trying to do historically informed theology, whether it's kind of in the formal sense, historical theology, or whether it's just whatever theology you're doing, recognizing, as you've said, I come from a certain place, I am a recipient of a certain tradition, and that shapes how I read scripture. You and I need to keep talking about that, because it's one of my favorite things.
Oh yes,
I want to kind of do that from the other side, be the theologian that's carefully thinking about history.
Yes, that's great.
And one of the questions, this relates really closely to one of the questions I got a lot when I told people I was going to talk to you, which is people are really wrestling, especially when it comes to this question about gender, how we differentiate between what is biblical and what is not just described in Scripture, but what is prescribed in Scripture,
Mhm.
and what is just cultural, whether that's cultural in the text, there's things described in the text that are cultural for that moment, or whether it's I showed up at a church and this is how they described marriage and gender and they thought it was biblical, but there were some cultural elements,
Right.
inevitably, as you've described. And I wonder how history in particular can help us think through untangling those two things, because it is
Mhm.
really hard, whether you're looking at the text or whether you're looking at a church community today, to know which is which, because they all come packaged together most of the time.
It's such a good question. And I also think, I think God has helped us with that question. When we think about the emphases that we find in the Old Testament and New Testament, we are always told that what matters is the heart. And that, it's not all of these external things that we are doing. I mean, that's the same message we get in the Old Testament. We see it again in the New Testament when Jesus calls the Pharisees whitewashed tombs. And it's this idea that what matters is not all of these external things, but what matters is why we are doing them, where our heart is focused and where our heart is centered. And I think what we have confused are these external things for for what is most important instead of our heart and the motivations. And if you look at the Bible, I mean, it is so hard for me to see, and I'll admit this is one of my biases. It is so hard for me to not see how God has always spoken to women in ways that are not culturally acceptable and empowered women in ways that are not culturally acceptable, and has never treated women the way that their culture dictates their places. And this starts with the story of Hagar. I mean, I think that's one of the most overlooked stories in the Bible. It's a horrible story, except for the fact that it is God who comes to Hagar and she names him as the God who sees. And in fact, I very rarely preach sermons because I really feel like my gift is to empower other women to preach who are really called in those areas. But I did preach one sermon, and it was called The God Who Sees. And that's really, I think God sees women. And as a historian, one of the remarkable things that I find in the Bible, if you go through and list out all the women who are listed by name, and even all of the women that we see participating with Jesus, one of the things that we find is that we don't see their husbands or their fathers mentioned nearly to the degree that we would expect. And think about Phoebe. We have no idea if Phoebe is attached or not. We can speculate all we like, but that didn't matter. That didn't matter. In a world in which that really did matter and that defined who she was, we are not given that information by Paul. And I can't help, I mean, for me, I'm like, that's so remarkable. And so I think I think when we think about how do we separate these cultural accretions versus what God, how God really responds or calls women to do, I think we should look to see how, these patterns and how God has always reached out to women, even amidst the worst moments of patriarchy. And it is, and I say this carefully because I'm not trying to portray a narrative of Christianity rescuing women from Judaism, because that's not true either, because the Judaic world also empowered women. I mean, it's the God of the Judaic world. The Old Testament empowered women too in ways. And we have a lot of really powerful female rabbis that we can talk about. And so it's continuing this narrative, I think, in the New Testament that had already begun in the Old Testament.
Is there anything that you would do differently looking back? I mean, you have the benefit of foresight or of hindsight to think
Mm-hmm.
about what you've done and the reception that it's been given. Is there anything that you would do differently based either on the criticisms, fair criticisms, unfair criticisms, just the reception in general,
Yeah.
or just things you've learned since you wrote it
Mm-hmm.
personally or in your academic work? Is there anything that you would do differently, with the ability to look back on it?
So I think That's not a good question for academics, because academics' answer is always yes. There are always things that we would have done differently. We would have changed. We would have added more. And that's funny. That's one of the funny things about trade press, publishing with the trade press, is they cut you off. they're like, no, sorry, you're done. And I mean, which is right, because people wouldn't read it if they let us do whatever we wanted to do. So yes, I have learned some things. I think the two areas that I'm most sensitive to that I would have probably done things a little bit different are, first of all, the Judaism question. I think I would have been more explicit that this is not Christianity treating women so much better than Judaism is. And I don't think I conveyed that narrative too much, but there are a couple of places that I wish I had made it clear that that wasn't the narrative I was, because I've seen the way people have responded. And when they pick up some things and I'm like, oh, that's not what I meant, I would have maybe clarified that a bit more. But I actually did change one sentence. I posted 5 errata on the Baker page, and one of those is a sentence that I changed. So if you get the 5th edition of it, it's fixed. The other thing that I would have changed, and this is something I've been pretty public about, is the question of race and Black women's experiences. And this is something I wrestled with while writing the book. I knew I was speaking as a white woman from a privileged situation. I tried to make that clear, but I wish that I had maybe either thinking about the title of the book or something like that, just made it really clear that this is a white woman speaking, and that Black women, while there are some parallels, and Black women have been influenced and hurt by this type of patriarchy rooted in white evangelicalism, their experience is different. And their responses are different, and we need to pay attention to those, and we need to hear their voices. So I wish I'd maybe done something a little different with that. But anyway, I guess, my consolation is that I was sensitive to that, and I did try, and I've been very responsive on this end in letting people know that that they're right, that this,
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. It was one of the other questions that I got a lot from people was how to think about the relationship between those two things. And I liked one of the questions Estelle Orr asked was about if we think we can kind of fix the problems in the churches that we're talking about, mostly white evangelical churches, by just talking about gender. And what I hear you saying is no, obviously race, plays a large part in that. Moving from kind of the history of it to what we do in our churches, could you talk a little bit about how maybe you've learned from others in the process of this about how we have to think about those two things together?
Oh, yes. No, I have. I would argue that historically, racism and patriarchy always go together. When you teach that there is something about the way a person is created that makes them able to have leadership over another person, you're not just talking about gender, you're also talking about ethnicity, what we have classified as race. And so it's no surprise that these two things really go together, because they're rooted in the same cause. This idea that God created some people to be smarter, to be able to lead in ways that others cannot, to have the right have the right to shape the culture and the occupations, the economic success of other people. The root cause is the same. And so I do think it's interesting to me how some conservative churches have really moved hard to try to eliminate racism, but yet still hold the standard on women. And in my mind, I'm like, you know what, that's not going to work, because you can't do one without the other. We've got to do both at the same time. And so I see them as connected.
No, that's really helpful. The two things that you've described I love are really good faith critiques of the book. Can you talk a little bit about what you have learned from the not very good faith critiques, ones that are, I think you and I would agree, and lots of people have also agreed, are unfair or misrepresent you or seem pretty ideologically motivated.
Right.
are there any things you've learned from them? Like, how has it shaped your work or your sense of vocation or your interest in continuing to talk about this? Is there anything at all redemptive from those kinds of
Oh,
responses?
yes, yes. One of them is simply how foreign a country the medieval Christianity is to modern evangelicals. I think one of the, I can pretty much predict how somebody is going to respond to the Making of Biblical Womanhood when one of their questions is about why would I put Saint Paula up as a positive example of motherhood? And that very clearly tells me something, that they are so unfamiliar with medieval Christianity, that's an interesting sort of thing, because I always throw back. I'm like, well, Jesus did tell us that if we weren't willing to leave our families, that we weren't ready to take the cross and follow him. And so, what do you do with that? It's really, and so medieval people may have gone too far that way but I think evangelicals have gone too far the other way with how we have idolized marriage and family. And so it has taught me that I need to realize that so many people are so unfamiliar with medieval Christianity that I need to maybe introduce it better. Instead of, I still made some assumptions in the Making of Biblical Womanhood. I honestly did not realize that the medieval saints that I talked about in chapter 3 would stun so many people, because I've been working and hearing about these women and reading about them for more than 20 years of my life, and I just forget. So that's one of the things, is just to be a little more sensitive, I think, to that I'm shocking a lot of people with this, and I need to realize that if I don't want them just to walk away, that I need to maybe introduce it in a way that can help them listen more than
Yeah.
just turning it off.
Well, that's
So,
I think that's true in my experience of the church, and even in some elements of my theological education, where we kind of skip from patristics, maybe a little
yes.
bit later than that, but then we really skip to the Reformation. And I just took a class this last semester on medieval Christianity
Oh,
because
yay.
I was in, the start of my program. My advisor goes, okay, we're not only thinking about how to prepare you to write a dissertation, we're thinking about what holes do you have from the education
Oh,
that you're coming with. And a big one, like I told him right off the bat, it's medieval theology. I don't know a lot of that. So I spent the whole semester reading, not only, speaking of interdisciplinary things, reading a bunch of Aquinas, but also reading a lot of medieval literature, because the professor I had
mhm.
recognized these things are all tied up together. And if there's anything I learned from that class, it was, this is foreign territory for me as an
Yes.
evangelical who has had, at this point, 5 years of theological education, which is that's really kind of a condemnation of the way that we think about things, that I could get a pretty good degree from a great seminary and yet have kind of not had more
Mhm.
than just the littlest, bits of medieval
Right.
history and theology. And so that's a huge thing, for not only for you thinking about how you'd write the book differently, but an
Yeah.
indictment on a lot of us to think about how in our theological education and our talking in churches, we could be including medieval theology as not just a Catholic thing that doesn't impact
Right.
us at all. Yeah.
That's exactly right. We compartmentalize it. And so I don't know. I'm really excited. My third book that I'm going to write, in what I've deemed my trilogy, is going to tackle this just big gap
Good.
in what we have lost from medieval Christianity.
I
So,
love that. Speaking of the total opposite end of the spectrum of medieval Christianity, one of the things that I have thought a lot about in thinking about your book and the whole past year of conversation is how much social media has played a role
yes.
in the conversations about gender in the church. And I think a lot of us saw this when it came to questions about abuse.
Hmm.
We recognized that there's lots of things about abuse in churches that would not have come out if it weren't for the way social media gave access for women to share stories, to find community. But I also just think the general broader conversation about gender in the church has been really shaped by, again, finding commonalities, being able to, work
Hmm.
together and share resources. How have you seen that over the last year, the way social media has played, the role social media has played in shifting those conversations about gender, maybe internally
Yeah.
for different people, but maybe even, in institutions or in churches?
No, that social media has really revolutionized a lot of things. Now, I say this as knowing full well the dangers of social media, and that we always have to be careful with it. I talk with graduate students about the use of social media too, but at the same time, it has opened doors, and it has made visible so many things that were invisible, and it also has brought that community. And I think, this is something that I heard over and over again from women who read The Making of Biblical Womanhood. They were like, I always thought I was alone. And now I have found that what was going on with me was the same thing that was going on with them. And so they're like, I don't feel alone. And then those women have then found other women and made that it has strengthened them. God created us to be community people. And however you feel about whether social media is just as good as in person, I'm not going to enter that debate. But what it does provide is real community. And whether it's better or not, that I'll let somebody else deal with that. But it has provided real community. And I think that is, and it's made people feel comfortable to ask questions. So I think that, making resources more visible, providing community, and then making people more comfortable in asking questions has really helped, I think, change the conversation. And some of the questions that I get most frequently, what Bible translation do I recommend? That's the number one question that I get still. It's funny. The second question I get is, how do I, what do I do if I'm in a complementarian church? What do I do? And then the third question I get is, how do I know more? And I say those are the three main questions that people get. And so it's like through social media, I am able to communicate with them in a large scale resources. And as much as I am fully aware of the hard parts of social media, I still think its benefits outweigh the cost.
Yeah. Can we really quick talk about those three?
Oh, sure.
How would you answer those three questions for people?
Yeah, sure. So Bible translations, I answer that I think part of our problem is that we only use one Bible translation, is that we choose one. And so I think a big problem would be solved if we used multiple Bible translations, and that we read the introduction so that we found out what the biases of the translators. Every translator is a traitor. Because their biases come through. So what we need to do is know what those biases are and know why things are different. So that's my first response. My second response is, if you use the ESV and you love the ESV, that's fine. Keep the ESV, but get something else that is, get the NRSV, get the NIV 2011 or the TNIV if you can find one. Get something else that will also help you balance out some of those places where the scripture has been changed in a way that pushes women out of leadership. So that's my short answer to the first one.
Yeah, no, that's great.
The second one is, what do we do? What if I'm in a complementarian church? So this one's hard. I am not just an academic, I'm also in ministry. So I think it causes me, I feel this pastoral need to help people if I can in some way. So I've been writing and thinking about this a little bit. And I would say, well, I'm not going to tell people if they need to leave or not, because everybody's in different situations. And honestly, if we had not been kicked out, I think we would have stayed, because we were making a difference. And I think we need people both on the inside and the outside of this. I mean, we've got to move the needle, and the needle may not be getting your church to change its stance on women. The needle may be getting your church to think that maybe they should include women more, and maybe let's talk about this. And so I think that, change, as a historian, I know change doesn't happen overnight. And so I don't think we should expect it. Change happens over generations. And so, I tell people I've always played the long game. And so I think that people in their churches, they may be at a place where they can play the long game in their churches. Some people, they may have hit so many walls, be so discouraged, be so afraid of what's being taught to their kids that they just need to walk away. But I think everybody, will hit those walls at different times.
Yeah.
And then what did I say for the third?
You said the third question was resources, or like where they could
Resources.
go more.
Yeah. Where they could go more. Oh, yes. I love that. So I've been trying to make more of these available. When the Christianity Today whole news story came out a few weeks ago, I actually published a blog post on resources for women. Sort of that was my kind of response to Christianity, to what was going on there, that I really think there's a lack of knowledge. And so I mean, gosh, one of the places actually I think I would go maybe to seminaries where you don't have to go to the seminary, but if you go to their websites, places like Northern Seminary that are very, very intentional about supporting women, and even places at DTS, there are some great faculty there that also do this. And so you can go, and often they will provide on their websites, they will often provide syllabi. They will often provide, even some of the books that they have written, and you can start building up some resources to counter. I would also recommend that people go through the books on their shelves, and if they realize that every single one of them is coming from the same group of people, diversify. I think that's part of the problem. We've become so siloed.
Yeah.
So it's not that you can't read certain folk.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
that you need to not only read them.
Yeah.
So
That's super helpful. Yeah. I feel like actually all three of those questions are questions I get a lot too. So it's really helpful to hear, not only, your expertise in thinking about Bible translations, but also, like you said, the pastoral side of
mhm.
talking to people who are really wrestling with
Yes.
questions that are hypothetically academic, but are
Right.
very personal as well, and change what they
Mhm.
do with their lives. And I think that's such a good word for people to say that, there's going to be different circumstances that
Right.
change why you would stay or go, different responses that are more diverse than just those two options. It might not just be
Right.
stay or go. It might be, continue to work on this certain issue, or it might be creatively engage while finding some ways to have your soul fed
Yes.
in another environment. There's all of these different kind of responses.
That is so important. Yeah.
Yeah.
And although I will slightly modify my answer, we may have stayed for a time, but one of the problems that I was encountering was, number one, I had become so isolated there that it was a sole problem for me. The other thing was my children. I was really getting worried about seeing the influence on both my son and daughter. So those things did really begin to weigh on me in ways that they wouldn't have if I was just alone. And if I maybe had one friend who I could really trust in that church. And by the time I got to the end, I was really afraid that anything I said would be taken back, to the leadership. And so I just kept my mouth shut all the time.
Yeah. And I think
Mhm.
what I hope people hear from all of that too is, on one hand, there's so much wisdom that you have and that other kind of sources they could find would have. But on the other hand, you need people in your life that know the circumstance, know the
Yes.
church, know you, know what you need, know you well enough to be the person that can step in and say, this isn't healthy. Or
Yes.
actually, I think you have more of a voice than you think you have. And you can,
Yeah,
say these things, either of those responses, but to have someone that knows you well enough to speak into that is
I think
huge
so.
and important.
I think
Yeah.
so.
One last question for you, Beth. I love this question, and multiple people also shared this on Twitter. What gives you hope right now about the church, about women's roles in the church, about the future for women in general, or just for you in your life? What makes you hopeful right now?
So I would say I don't know the names of all those readers. I did see some of your questions last night, but it was right before I went to bed, and I'm old, so I went to bed. Uh, but I did see some of them, and I saw a couple of the names who asked that question, and my honest response was, "You give me hope. My readers give me hope. Their responses, their courage." And, they come and they tell me stories all the time about the small things that they've done, like speaking out in their Bible study groups, or recommending or going and talking to their pastors, and these little moments of everyday courage. And, that's where change happens. It happens in those little moments that get people to start thinking. And so many people are doing that right now. It really does give me hope. Now, I am a hopeful person. I really am. I have moments where when I get really discouraged, I'm like, people, it's really bad because I really am a half glass full person. So I always look for hope. And, I've said this multiple times too, is that what gives me hope is that Christianity is not dependent upon me. It is not dependent upon whether or not these churches change in the way that they talk about women. Christianity does not depend upon human success. And that is it. That I think should give us hope. And I know sometimes it may be really hard to see that because humans can surround us, and the weights that they put on us and that they make us carry are so, so heavy. But, I go back to my mantra, Jesus sets us free.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what gives me hope.
I love that so much, Beth. I really think what a word for the people that we were just talking about, struggling through decisions about churches and family and what they do, to just say, it's not dependent on you. You can take that burden off of your shoulders, but you can find ways of small, intentional faithfulness over time and recognize that God will honor those things. That's such a good word. Thank you so much, Beth, for your time today. Thank you for your book. And thank you for your heart to continue ministering through writing and social media to people who are asking these questions. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having me.
The Holy Post Podcast is a production of Holy Post Media. Production assistance by Julie Betcher. Editing by Jason Rugg. Help us create more thoughtful Christian media by supporting us at patreon.com/Holy Post. Also, be sure to leave a review on iTunes so more people can discover thoughtful Christian commentary, plus ukulele, and occasional butt news. Visit holypost.com for show notes, news stories, Holy Post merchandise, and much more.